Politics Part 2. This is the first chapter, Power Sharing. Last year we had seen that in a democracy, all power does not rest or lie with any one organ of the state. An intelligent sharing of power among legislature, executive and judiciary is very important to the design of a democracy. Every government has three organs: legislature, executive and judiciary. The legislature makes the laws, it is the lawmaking body of the government. The executive puts those laws into practice, it executes the laws, and the judiciary oversees whether the laws that are being made for the country are being properly implemented or not. So in this chapter of power sharing, we have two examples with us. One is the example of Belgium and the other is the example of Sri Lanka. Today we will be discussing about Belgium. Now Belgium is a small country in Europe and the area of Belgium is smaller than that of the state of Haryana. Belgium has its borders with Netherlands, France and Germany, and it has a population of a little over than 1 crore, which is just half the population of Haryana. The ethnic composition of Belgium is very complex. Now here we can see the meaning of ethnic. Ethnic is a social division based on shared culture. People belonging to the same ethnic group believe in their own common descent. जो लोग अपने आप को एक ही ethnic group का मानते हैं, वो ये उनको ये पता है कि वो एक ही पूर्वज के या एक ही टाइप के लोगों से पैदा हुए हुए हैं. They have similarities of physical type, they look alike, their color is the same. They need not always have the same religion or nationality. Now suppose wherever you go throughout the world, you can recognize the Asians. You don't exactly come to know whether they're Indians or whether they are Pakistanis or Bangladeshis, but you come to know they're Asians. If somebody comes to our country, you can make out they're either Europeans or Americans or Australians. You can't make out actually, but because they're whites, because the color of their eyes is different, so you can make out they're not from Asia. They may be either European, American or Australian. Now the ethnic composition of Belgium is very complex. There throughout the country, the Dutch are in a majority. Basically in Belgium, there are three categories of people. That means the people who speak three different languages: Dutch, French and Germans. Throughout the country, the Dutch are in a majority. The 59% Dutch, 40% French and 1% Germans. But in Brussels, which is the capital of Belgium, there the French are in a majority and the Dutch are in a minority. The French are 80% and the Dutch are 20% in Brussels. Now the minority French speaking community was relatively rich and powerful. That means in comparison to the two, that is the French and the Dutch, the French speaking community was relatively rich and powerful, and this was not liked or this was resented by the Dutch speaking community who wanted to get the benefits, who got the benefits of economic development and education much later. So this led to tension between the Dutch speaking and the French speaking communities throughout the 1950s and 1960s, and this tension was more acute. That means you could actually make out or you could see this tension more in Brussels. Now here, why more in Brussels? Because throughout the country the Dutch were in a majority, but in Brussels the Dutch were in a minority and the French were in a majority, whereas the French were in a majority throughout the French were in a minority throughout the country. Now the government of Belgium realized this problem. They realized that something had to be done. So between 1970 and 1993, between 1970 and 1993, the Constitution of Belgium was amended 4 times, and as a result of this, the accommodation was done in Belgium, or this is called the power sharing arrangement of the Belgian constitution or elements of the Belgian constitution. According to this, there were four elements of the Belgian model. First, there were to be equal number of French and Dutch ministers. When the ministry was to be formed, and suppose there were 50 ministers, so 25 had to be Dutch and 25 had to be French. And no decision could be taken unilaterally. Uni means single-handedly. When the ministers had to be consulted, then the majority of both the communities had to be taken into account. अगर मेजॉरिटी चाहिए तो ये नहीं कि 50 में से सिर्फ 30 लोगों ने येस बोल दिया तो डिसीजन लिया जाएगा, नहीं. 25 जो डच है उसमें से भी मेजॉरिटी और 25 जो फ्रेंच है उसमें भी मेजॉरिटी चाहिए होती थी. देन द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स वर नॉट सबऑर्डिनेट टू द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट. जो बेल्जियम में जो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट थी वो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के अंडर नहीं थी, इवन दो बेल्जियम इज अ फेडरेशन. थर्ड, देयर वाज टू बी अ सेपरेट for government for Brussels. Why Brussels? Because the composition of Brussels was different from the other places. In Belgium, the Dutch were in the majority and the French in a minority, but in Brussels, the French were in a majority and the Dutch in a minority. So Brussels was given a separate constitution. Then, other than the central and the state government, there was to be a community government which was to be elected by the people belonging to one language community, Dutch, French or German. So this was the third type of government other than the central and the state governments. So it was to be elected by the Dutch, the French and the Germans wherever they were living. Now wherever they were living, by this we mean whether they were living in Wallonia or they were living in Flemish region or Brussels, they could be elected from anywhere, and this government was to take decision or had power regarding cultural, educational and language related issues. So the Belgian model is very complicated, and even it is complicated for the people living there, but the power sharing arrangements in Belgium or accommodation in Belgium has worked out well so far. And because of this power sharing arrangement, they could avoid a civil war. Basically, a civil war means a war between different categories of people in a country, or two categories. Civil, that means among the people. So this kind of a civil war was averted in Belgium, and this did not lead to a possible division of the country on linguistic basis or lines. And when some countries of Europe came together to form the European Union, Brussels was